After discovering the first T-shaped pillar buried at the site, he soon found more of these massive structures.
The Göbekli Tepe really did send shockwaves through the whole world of early prehistory.
Before his death in 2014, Klaus Schmidt, the German archaeologist who had devoted decades of his life to uncovering the mysteries of ancient Anatolia, stood at the edge of a new revelation that sent ripples of fear and fascination through the archaeological world. His work at Göbekli Tepe had already rewritten history, challenging long-held assumptions about human civilization. But what he uncovered shortly before his passing, deep within the sister site of Gürcütepe, was something that shook even his steadfast scientific resolve. Gürcütepe, located just a few kilometers from Göbekli Tepe, appeared at first to be another Neolithic mound, an ordinary cluster of ancient stones buried beneath the earth. Yet as excavations deepened, Schmidt and his team realized they had stumbled upon something that not only paralleled Göbekli Tepe, but carried implications far more disturbing about the origins and intentions of early humanity. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The discovery began innocently enough, with survey teams scanning the rolling hills of southeastern Turkey. The terrain was scattered with limestone fragments, flint tools, and broken pillars resembling the megalithic T-shaped stones found at Göbekli Tepe. When Schmidt first walked the site in the early 2000s, he immediately recognized the telltale signs of deliberate construction hidden beneath the soil. Unlike the ceremonial grandeur of Göbekli Tepe, Gürcütepe seemed to hold an undercurrent of secrecy, its architecture buried deeper, its carvings more distorted, its layout less open to the sky. What started as a complementary project became a labyrinth of unanswered questions. Schmidt's notes from that period reveal a growing unease, a feeling that something was intentionally hidden there long ago. As if the builders wanted to conceal not only the structures themselves, but the knowledge that had driven them to build. At first, the dig revealed familiar features. Circular enclosures surrounded by monolithic pillars, some decorated with animal reliefs. But as the excavation progressed, differences emerged that made Gürcütepe far stranger than its older sibling. The carvings here were not simply of lions, snakes, and boars in majestic poses. They were distorted, almost grotesque, as if meant to frighten rather than to revere. Some showed composite creatures, half human, half beast, with exaggerated limbs and hollow eyes that seemed to stare out of the stone. Unlike Göbekli Tepe's orderly arrangements, Gürcütepe's enclosures overlapped chaotically, built atop one another as if successive generations tried to bury what the previous ones had exposed. The stratigraphy told a story of construction followed by hurried concealment repeated again and again. This cycle of building and burial suggested panic rather than devotion, an act of desperation rather than ritual continuity. The most chilling revelation came when Schmidt's team uncovered a series of subterranean chambers beneath one of the main enclosures. The tunnels were narrow, carved through solid limestone, and led into rooms so low that a grown man could barely crawl inside. Inside these chambers were not the symbolic carvings of animals or abstract forms, but skeletal remains, human, twisted and arranged in unnatural positions, facing inward toward a central pillar carved with a featureless humanoid figure. The bones bore strange markings, as if they had been deliberately scored with stone tools. Schmidt, trained to approach such findings without superstition, struggled to interpret them within the framework of known Neolithic culture. Were these burials, sacrifices, or something far darker? Perhaps an act of ritual punishment or containment? As radiocarbon dating confirmed that Gürcütepe predated Göbekli Tepe by several centuries, Schmidt's perception of the site changed completely. It was no longer just a neighbor to the world's first temple. It was its prototype. Yet, if Göbekli Tepe represented humanity's first organized expression of spirituality, Gürcütepe seemed to embody its nightmares. A place where early humans might have confronted forces they did not understand. The carvings on the central pillars depicted scenes that made little sense from a religious perspective, but bore an unmistakable air of warning. One showed a ring of humanoid figures encircling a monstrous form emerging from beneath the earth. Another depicted the sun and moon in disarray, surrounded by spirals and descending lines, as if recording a celestial event or catastrophe. Schmidt's journals, recovered after his death, revealed that he had begun to see Gürcütepe not merely as a site of worship, but as a repository. a vault built to seal away something ancient and feared. He referred to one of the deeper chambers as the containment room, noting its unusually thick walls and the traces of burned organic material near its entrance. Charcoal samples indicated that massive fires had been lit inside, perhaps in a ritual of purification or destruction. Yet what truly unsettled him was the discovery of symbols repeated throughout the complex, a series of interlocking spirals and serpentine lines that appeared to map not just the local terrain but the sky above it. The same symbols appeared at Göbekli Tepe, but here they were carved deeper, almost gouged, as if to emphasize their importance, or to ward something off. What terrified Schmidt was the implication that the builders of Gürcütepe Tepe had known something catastrophic, something beyond their comprehension. These people lived millennia before written language, before agriculture even reached full development, yet they had constructed monuments of staggering precision and size. For what purpose? Schmidt had once argued that Göbekli Tepe marked the beginning of religion, a place where hunter-gatherers came together to venerate unseen powers. But Gürcütepe Tepe made him reconsider whether those unseen powers were benevolent at all. The imagery was too violent, too chaotic. He began to suspect that the builders were not calling upon gods but attempting to seal them away. In the last months before his passing, Schmidt privately confided to colleagues that Gürcütepe's Tepe's layout was not random, but followed a pattern that mirrored the movement of constellations during a specific period around 10,000 BCE. The alignment seemed to focus on a particular section of the sky where, according to later Sumerian and Babylonian records, a dark star or hidden celestial body was said to have appeared briefly. This connection disturbed him deeply because it suggested continuity, a transmission of forbidden knowledge from prehistory to early civilization. He speculated that Gürcütepe Tepe might have been built in response to an event witnessed in the heavens, something that terrified its builders enough to abandon everything else and construct a monument of warning. Schmidt's fascination with this celestial connection bordered on obsession. He noted that the pillars' orientation corresponded not only to the stars, but also to subterranean features, as if the builders had sought to align the heavens with the underworld. This dual focus, above and below, was unprecedented. It hinted at a worldview where what happened in the sky was inseparably linked to what emerged from beneath the earth. Myths from later cultures across Mesopotamia and Anatolia often spoke of gods or creatures banished underground, beings that once roamed the surface until they were confined by divine or human intervention. Schmidt began to wonder if Gürcütepe Tepe represented the earliest manifestation of that myth, an attempt by early humans to imprison something that had once walked among them. The deeper the excavation went, the more disturbing the findings became. Beneath one of the main pillars, the team discovered a massive stone slab that sealed an even deeper cavity. When they finally pried it open, they were met with a rush of stale, suffocating air and a silence so profound that even the workers hesitated to continue. Inside lay a circular pit lined with smooth stones, its purpose unclear. At the bottom were fragments of bone, but not human or animal as known to archaeology. These bones were unusually thick, almost petrified, and their structure did not match any species in the fossil record. Schmidt sent samples for analysis, but the results were inconclusive. They appeared ancient, yet the isotopic ratios did not correspond to the expected patterns of decay. It was as if they belonged to something that had been preserved unnaturally, suspended in time. For Schmidt, who had spent years demystifying human prehistory, this discovery was profoundly unsettling. He had always dismissed sensationalist theories linking Göbekli Tepe to lost civilizations or extraterrestrial contact. Yet Gürcütepe Tepe blurred the line between science and myth. The reliefs seemed to depict encounters between humans and beings of impossible scale or form. One particular carving haunted him, a towering figure with elongated limbs, surrounded by smaller humans kneeling or fleeing. The image radiated fear, not reverence. He could not shake the sense that the site recorded an event so traumatic that it became embedded in the collective memory of early mankind, later emerging as the myths of gods, giants, or demons found in ancient texts across the world. As the final excavation season approached, Schmidt noted anomalies in the ground's magnetic readings around the deepest enclosure. Instruments malfunctioned, compasses spun erratically, and the temperature within the chamber fluctuated inexplicably despite stable weather conditions outside. The team's geophysical scans revealed cavities that defied simple geological explanation, spaces that appeared to shift or distort in size depending on the angle of measurement. When Schmidt reviewed the data, he reportedly muttered that the site itself seemed alive, responding to intrusion. While his colleagues attributed these irregularities to instrumentation error, Schmidt could not dismiss the feeling that Gürcütepe Tepe was designed to contain something dynamic, perhaps even dangerous. One of his most unsettling interpretations involved the recurring serpent motifs. At Göbekli Tepe, snakes appeared as protective or symbolic creatures. At Gürcütepe, they dominated every surface, coiling around human figures, devouring birds, and emerging from the mouths of carved heads. Schmidt suggested that the serpent might not represent fertility or renewal, as in later iconography, but an ancient terror, a force of chaos the builders sought to appease or imprison. His field notes refer repeatedly to the serpent beneath, a phrase he borrowed from Near Eastern myth but applied here with chilling literalness. The tunnels and cavities under the site, he speculated, might have been modeled after the imagined lair of such an entity, perhaps even constructed as a prison to ensure it never rose again. The implications of this were staggering. If Gürcütepe Tepe truly functioned as a containment structure, it would mean that prehistoric humans possessed not only advanced architectural skills, but also a profound and fearful understanding of metaphysical danger. Schmidt wrestled with this realization, torn between his training as a rational scientist and the mounting evidence that defied explanation. The sheer effort required to build such a complex, thousands of tons of stone quarried, carved, and transported without metal tools or wheels, implied a motivation beyond simple ritual. Fear, he concluded, was the greatest motivator of all. Whatever had inspired Gürcütepe Tepe's creation must have been an existential threat, something that united early tribes in a collective act of defense against the unknown. In the last recorded entries of his notebook, Schmidt reflected on how both Göbekli Tepe and Gürcütepe Tepe might represent two sides of humanity's awakening. The former celebrated creation and cosmic order, the latter confronted destruction and chaos. Together, they formed a narrative arc, the dawn of consciousness shadowed by the fear of forces that could undo it. He wondered if this duality lay at the root of all later religions, the eternal struggle between building and burying, between revelation and concealment. The ancients at Gürcütepe Tepe, he believed, had not worshipped gods. They had sealed away nightmares. The stone structures of Gürcütepe Tepe still stand buried, their secrets largely unexcavated. Yet the traces uncovered before Schmidt's death point toward an interpretation that merges myth and archaeology in unprecedented ways. The repeated cycles of burial, the alignment with celestial events, the evidence of fire and sacrifice, all suggest that Gürcütepe Tepe was built not to glorify but to contain. The people who labored there may have believed they were holding back something that once threatened to consume the world. Their terror, frozen in stone, transcends time. Schmidt's findings, though never fully published in his lifetime, hinted that the builders of Gürcütepe Tepe were driven by more than superstition. They seemed to possess a memory of an encounter, perhaps with a natural disaster, a celestial event, or a phenomenon that their minds could only translate into mythic imagery. Whether it was a comet, a seismic upheaval, or something more inexplicable, they encoded their fear in the language of stone. The spiral patterns, when mapped onto the sky, match the trajectory of known cometary paths reconstructed by astronomers for that era. If true, Gürcütepe Tepe could represent humanity's earliest record of a cosmic catastrophe, one so traumatic that it reshaped their entire worldview. But Schmidt also considered another possibility, that the carvings were not depictions of what they saw in the sky, but warnings about what descended from it. The haunting imagery of hybrid beings and distorted animals might have symbolized mutations, disease, or radiation, concepts far beyond Neolithic understanding but perhaps experienced through their effects. Fires burned deep within the sealed chambers as if purging contamination. To later civilizations, such acts would translate into ritual cleansing. To those who lived through it, they were acts of survival. Gürcütepe Tepe might therefore be humanity's first quarantine zone, a sacred and forbidden space meant to trap both physical and spiritual contagion. Whatever the truth, the site carried an aura that even modern excavators could not escape. Workers reported unease, strange dreams, and an oppressive silence that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. Schmidt, a man of science, never indulged superstition publicly, but privately he admitted that Gürcütepe Tepe felt different, heavier, as though its stones retained a memory of fear. His wife, Sigdem Klaus Schmidt, later mentioned that he had grown withdrawn near the end, burdened by the sense that he had uncovered something humanity was not meant to remember. The implications of Gürcütepe's discovery extend far beyond archaeology. If Schmidt's interpretations are even partially correct, the site challenges the very chronology of human awareness. It suggests that organized construction, astronomical observation, and symbolic communication existed thousands of years before the accepted dawn of civilization. More disturbingly, it implies that the earliest human societies were not simply curious or reverent, they were afraid. Fear, not faith, may have been the first force to bind humanity together. The weight of what Klaus Schmidt uncovered at Gürcütepe Tepe extended far beyond the boundaries of archaeology, pressing into the realm of philosophy, psychology, and even metaphysics. Though his work was rooted in empirical observation, the site forced him to confront questions that no carbon sample or stratigraphic layer could resolve. What did the builders of Gürcütepe Tepe see, or believe they saw, that compelled them to labor on such a colossal scale for purposes that did not serve survival, comfort, or prosperity? These were not the actions of a community driven by mere curiosity. There was urgency in every carved line, an echo of collective dread buried under millennia of dust. Schmidt began to understand that Gürcütepe Tepe was not a monument to gods, but a bulwark against memory itself, a structure meant to separate humanity from something they could not face. As excavations reached deeper strata, Schmidt noticed an unsettling consistency in the architecture. Each successive layer mirrored the one above, but with subtle deviations, as if the builders were reenacting the same process over generations, refining a pattern they did not fully comprehend. The innermost enclosures were the most precise, their stonework smoother, their alignments more exact. Yet as one moved outward, the craftsmanship grew rougher, the symbols cruder, suggesting that the knowledge guiding the first builders had gradually been lost or intentionally withheld. It was as if each generation had tried to rebuild what their ancestors had buried without understanding why it had been buried in the first place. This pattern revealed a haunting paradox, the act of preservation through destruction, the eternal cycle of remembering and forgetting. Schmidt came to view Gürcütepe Tepe as a kind of Neolithic palimpsest, a layered text written and rewritten by those who feared their own knowledge. He imagined the first builders as witnesses to an event that shattered their understanding of reality. Perhaps a natural cataclysm, perhaps something far stranger. They had encoded their terror in stone, hoping to contain it, but later generations mistook the symbols for sacred motifs and resurrected them without grasping their original intent. By the time of Göbekli Tepe, the meaning had transformed entirely. What had begun as a warning had become worship. Schmidt found this notion profoundly disturbing, that civilization itself might have been born from a misinterpretation of fear, that the first temples were built not to praise the divine but to keep the darkness from returning. He often spoke of the psychological dimension of the site, though rarely in public. In private correspondence, he described Gürcütepe Tepe as a mirror of the human mind in its infancy, a reflection of how consciousness first encountered the unknown. The carvings of monstrous hybrids, he suggested, might not depict literal beings but the projections of primal terror, images drawn from dreams and hallucinations induced by trauma or isolation. Yet even as metaphors, they carried power. The human brain, newly capable of abstract thought, had no defense against its own imagination. What began as fear of the dark or the storm could, when magnified by collective anxiety, become a mythic entity, a presence so overwhelming that entire societies organized their lives around containing it. Schmidt's approach to Gürcütepe Tepe gradually blurred the line between archaeology and psychology. He saw the site as the first expression of humanity's inner conflict, the desire to understand, and the simultaneous need to suppress what was discovered. The builders were the first to confront the abyss between knowledge and terror. They had crossed a threshold of awareness, and in doing so, uncovered something their minds could not reconcile. Whether that something was a literal event or a symbolic awakening mattered less than the emotional truth it carried. The stones, he believed, were not merely architectural. They were therapeutic, a way for a traumatized people to process the unprocessable. But there was an element that refused to fit within the boundaries of psychology alone. The patterns in the reliefs, when mapped numerically, showed a strange mathematical consistency. Schmidt noticed that certain ratios repeated across different enclosures, the spacing between pillars, the dimensions of the circles, the frequency of specific symbols, all corresponded to geometric progressions found in later sacred architecture, from Mesopotamian ziggurats to Egyptian temples. It was as if Gürcütepe Tepe contained the embryonic form of a universal design principle, a proto-geometry of the sacred. Yet the precision was too advanced for its time. The builders could not have possessed the tools to calculate such ratios consciously, which led Schmidt to wonder whether the knowledge had come from observation of natural patterns, the movements of the stars, the rhythm of the seasons, or from something else entirely, something instinctive or revealed. In his notes, Schmidt referred to this phenomenon as intuitive geometry. He believed the builders of Gürcütepe Tepe might have tapped into an inherent mathematical order of the universe, a pattern perceived through trance, intuition, or what he called contact with the unseen. To him, this was not mystical but anthropological. Early humans lacking language for abstract concepts externalized their experiences in symbolic form. The terrifying possibility, however, was that what they perceived was not benign. The recurring serpent and spiral motifs could represent forces of entropy or destruction, the mathematical manifestation of chaos itself. If so, Gürcütepe Tepe might stand as humanity's first attempt to map and neutralize cosmic disorder through architecture. The physical environment around Gürcütepe Tepe reinforced this impression. The site lay at the convergence of tectonic boundaries where the Earth's crust had long been restless. Geologically, it was a place of tension, a literal fault line between stability and upheaval. Schmidt noted that many ancient sacred sites, including Göbekli Tepe, were situated along similar zones of seismic volatility. He theorized that early humans may have sensed these areas as alive, feeling the subtle tremors, hearing the subterranean groans of the planet, and interpreting them as voices of the gods or spirits. At Gürcütepe Tepe, however, this natural power seemed to have been deliberately harnessed or countered. The massive stone rings acted almost like dampeners, as if the builders were trying to stabilize the earth itself. What haunted Schmidt was the thought that Gürcütepe Tepe was less a temple than a machine, a stone mechanism built for an unknown purpose. The precision of the alignments, the layering of enclosures, the presence of acoustically resonant chambers all hinted at an intentional design. When sound was produced inside certain enclosures, it reverberated with unnatural intensity, amplifying and distorting the human voice into something otherworldly. Experiments by later researchers confirmed that the frequency of these echoes could induce altered states of consciousness. Schmidt suspected that the builders had discovered this effect accidentally and then ritualized it, using sound to commune with or repel the forces they feared. The entire site, he thought, might have functioned as a vast resonant instrument, channeling human emotion into vibration, vibration into structure, and structure into meaning. The deeper chambers, sealed for millennia, intensified this sense of engineered mystery. In one of them, Schmidt found a polished limestone surface unlike any other. It reflected light faintly, almost like a mirror. Around it were carved symbols resembling eyes, spirals, and flames. He speculated that this chamber could have served as a place of vision, where initiates confronted their fears or sought revelations through sensory deprivation. Yet the atmosphere of the space, stifling, oppressive, charged, made it difficult for anyone to remain inside for long. Even modern visitors described feelings of vertigo and unease. Schmidt recorded these reactions meticulously, aware that they might reveal how the site manipulated human perception. As he pieced together the fragments of Gürcütepe Tepe's design, Schmidt began to see parallels with later mythologies across the ancient world. The motif of the buried god or sleeping terror recurred from Anatolia to Sumer, from Egypt to Greece, the idea of a powerful being confined beneath the earth awaiting release. These myths, he realized, might not have arisen independently. They could be cultural echoes of an event recorded in architecture long before language took form. If Gürcütepe Tepe was indeed the origin of such stories, it meant that humanity's earliest myths were not inventions but memories, refracted through millennia of retelling. The terrifying truth, then, was not simply that Gürcütepe Tepe existed, but that its builders had seen something that later civilizations could only remember as legend. One of Schmidt's most cryptic observations concerned the symbolism of inversion. Many of Gürcütepe's Tepe's carvings depicted animals and humans upside down, as if the natural order had been reversed. In one relief, a man appeared to fall headfirst into the earth, while a serpent coiled upward toward the sky. This inversion suggested a cosmological upheaval, a world turned inside out. Schmidt theorized that the builders might have experienced a period of environmental collapse or astronomical disruption, events that blurred the boundary between heaven and earth. Yet the motif also carried psychological weight, representing the descent into the subconscious, the confrontation with inner chaos. To him, Gürcütepe Tepe was both a physical site and a metaphor for that descent, humanity's first journey into the darkness of its own mind. He spent his final years contemplating how fear could be the foundation of civilization. The notion was counterintuitive, yet compelling. While traditional archaeology viewed temples as expressions of awe or gratitude toward benevolent deities, Gürcütepe Tepe inverted this idea. Here, architecture was not a celebration, but a defense mechanism. Every pillar, every enclosure was an act of containment. Fear, Schmidt realized, was not merely a byproduct of human evolution. It was a creative force, driving innovation and cooperation. The builders of Gürcütepe Tepe had channeled terror into structure, transforming chaos into geometry, the intangible into stone. In doing so, they laid the groundwork for culture itself. This interpretation redefined the meaning of progress. Civilization did not emerge from tranquility or abundance as previously believed, but from the confrontation with existential dread. The act of building Gürcütepe Tepe may have been humanity's first declaration of defiance against a hostile universe. The stones were not prayers but barriers, not monuments to faith but to resilience. By shaping their fear into architecture, the builders transcended it, at least temporarily. Yet the irony remained. The very structures meant to contain terror became objects of reverence for later generations, perpetuating the same cycle of awe and dread that continues into modernity. Schmidt's growing sense of unease came from recognizing this continuity. He began to see patterns connecting Gürcütepe Tepe to later religious traditions, the flood myths, the tales of judgment and resurrection, the duality of creation and destruction. These narratives, he thought, might all trace back to a single origin: the trauma recorded in the stones of Gürcütepe Tepe. Humanity's collective psyche, shaped by millennia of survival, still carried the imprint of that ancient fear. Every cathedral, every altar, every ritual might be an unconscious reenactment of the same act of containment performed by those first builders. The emotional toll of this realization weighed heavily on Schmidt. He often described feeling as though he were disturbing something that preferred to remain buried. His dreams grew restless. He spoke of voices that seemed to echo in the chambers even when no one was there. Whether these experiences were psychological projections or genuine anomalies, they reinforced his conviction that Gürcütepe Tepe was not just an archaeological site, but a threshold, a place where the boundaries between past and present, myth and reality, began to dissolve. He understood that once such a threshold was crossed, it could not easily be closed again. The final stage of his work focused on the site's relationship to time itself. Gürcütepe Tepe's builders, Schmidt believed, had possessed an understanding of temporal cycles far beyond their era. The positioning of certain pillars corresponded to astronomical events that occurred only once every several millennia. This suggested that the site was designed not for a single generation but for eternity, a message to the distant future or perhaps a warning. The cycles represented in the carvings might not refer to agricultural seasons or lunar phases, but to cosmic patterns of destruction and renewal. If so, Gürcütepe Tepe could be interpreted as a clock counting down to the recurrence of whatever event had first inspired its construction. This idea haunted Schmidt. He was reluctant to voice it publicly, fearing ridicule, yet privately he confided that he believed humanity might be approaching another turning of that cycle. The alignment of modern celestial phenomena with those encoded in the stones seemed too precise to be coincidence. To him, the ancients were not primitive but prescient. They had left behind a record of catastrophe in the only form they could, hoping that one day, when the signs returned, their descendants would remember. The legacy of Gürcütepe Tepe thus extended beyond archaeology into the domain of prophecy. Schmidt did not claim that the site foretold literal doom, but he sensed that it embodied a truth about human nature, that we are always on the verge of rediscovering what we once buried. The terror of Gürcütepe Tepe was not confined to its stones. It was part of the human condition, the eternal tension between curiosity and caution, between the urge to uncover and the instinct to conceal. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us? What are your thoughts on Klaus Schmidt's terrifying revelation about Gürcütepe Tepe? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.